Numbers, numbers everywhere. Sometimes they can seem a little, I don't know, boring, right?
Yeah, sometimes.
But today, we are diving into a metric that sounds pretty basic at first glance, but trust me, it gets interesting. We're talking about the gross enrollment ratio, GER.
GER, yeah.
It tells us a lot about who gets access to education around the world.
Right.
So picture a classroom, desks all lined up, ready for students.
Okay.
GER basically tells us how full those desks are at different grade levels. Are all those seats taken, or are some kids missing out?
I see.
And here's where we're going even deeper. We're adding another layer to this whole thing, a gender lens. Because we want to see if this GER, if it looks different for boys versus girls.
It's a good point, yeah.
So to help us break all this down, I've got our expert here. So is it really as simple as just looking at the overall GER, or do we need to zoom in more?
Oh, we definitely got to zoom in. We have to break it down. It's much more revealing that way.
Okay, how so?
It's like, imagine you're exploring a forest, right?
Yeah.
You wouldn't just say, oh, look, there are trees. You'd want to know what types of trees are there, how old they are they healthy?
Right, it's like getting the full picture.
Exactly. And that's what we've got to do with the GER. We need to look at it at different levels, primary, lower secondary, upper secondary, that sort of thing, to really understand the full story.
That makes a lot of sense, yeah. Different stages of education, maybe different challenges and barriers too.
Exactly. Different things going on at different points in a student's life. And when we analyze all this GER data with a specific focus on gender, well, that's when we start to see some eye-opening stuff.
Okay, you got me. I'm hooked. What's the data telling us?
Well, globally speaking, when it comes to primary education, boys and girls, they tend to have, similar enrollment rates.
Okay.
But here's where things get interesting. As we start looking at higher levels, like lower and upper secondary education, that's usually when a gap starts to appear.
Oh, so you're saying the higher the education level, the wider that gap gets between genders.
Yeah, oftentimes that's what we see.
That's kind of worrying, isn't it?
It is worrying, and there are a bunch of different things that contribute to it.
Like what?
Well, in a lot of regions, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, poverty plays a huge role.
Right. Makes sense.
We've seen that girls from, poorer backgrounds, they're way less likely to go to secondary school compared to, their wealthier counterparts.
Yeah.
Sometimes they have to stay home and help out, or their families prioritize their brother's education.
It just breaks my heart to think that something as basic as a child's gender could actually limit their chances in life.
It's really tough. And it's not even just about, money or economics. Cultural norms play a big part, too.
Yeah.
There are places in the world where there's this deep-seated son preference, where they see a boy's education as more valuable somehow.
Wow. I never even considered that angle. So we're talking about a whole bunch of different factors all playing together here. Cultural, economic, social, right?
You got it. It's super complex. But one thing I do want to mention, it's important to remember that this isn't the case everywhere. It's not like some universal constant. There are actually regions out there where girls are doing better in terms of enrollment than boys.
Really? That's amazing.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. They're defying the trend.
What's going on in those places?
It's often down to really targeted policies and interventions. Some countries, they've implemented programs, for example, that offer financial incentives to families for sending their daughters to school. They're directly challenging those old norms.
Oh, interesting.
And others have focused on making schools more welcoming to girls,
Right.
addressing things like safety and sanitation, those sorts of things.
So it sounds like these places, what did you call them? Positive deviants? They're like a beacon of hope?
I like that. Positive deviance, yeah.
Ah.
Yeah, they really are, because it shows us that change is possible.
If we know the challenges that girls are facing, then maybe we can actually come up with solutions that actually make a difference.
Exactly. That's the key. Understand the problems to fix them. And that's where data like this can really help.
It all comes back to the numbers, huh?
It does, yeah.
This GER, it's not just some meaningless number.
Right.
It's a call to action for all of us.
Absolutely. And it shows us how important it is to look at things through this lens,
Yeah.
a gender lens. Because when we do that, we can really get a handle on the complexities of educational inequality.
This has been a really eye-opening deep dive. So for everyone listening, as you learn more about this, here's something to think about. If we could actually make it happen, if we could achieve true gender equality in education, what would that do? What kind of ripple effects would that have throughout society? Just something to think about. You've really honed in on gross enrollment ratios,
Yeah.
which for those of us who, maybe haven't encountered that term before, basically means how many kids are actually enrolled in school versus how many should be.
Exactly.
And then you broke that down even further
Mhm.
by level of education, which is a really nice way to look at it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So what are your initial thoughts on kind of the overall trends we're seeing in this data?
Well, one of the most encouraging trends is the upward trajectory of girls in school across all levels of education.
Mm-hmm.
More girls are getting an education than ever before. And this isn't just about numbers on a page.
Right.
This is about transforming lives, right?
Right.
When girls get educated, entire communities benefit from that.
Yeah.
Lower rates of child marriage, healthier families, greater economic participation.
Yeah, that's a really important point to make.
Yeah.
Because it's easy to get caught up in the statistics of it all.
Hmm.
But these numbers represent real change for people on the ground.
Exactly.
One thing that stood out to me, and I'd love to get your take on it, was the spike in progress that we see around 2015.
Right.
Was there anything specific happening around that time?
That's a great observation. And while the data itself doesn't pinpoint a single cause,
Sure.
it does coincide with the launch of several global initiatives aimed at girls' education.
Okay.
For example, the UN Sustainable Development Goals, which were adopted in 2015, placed a strong emphasis on gender equality in education.
It really makes you wonder. I mean, obviously we can't draw a straight line,
That's
but
right.
how much of initiatives like that, alongside countless other efforts on every level, contributed to this positive trend we see?
Absolutely, and I think it highlights how interconnected these issues are
Yeah.
and the ripple effect that dedicated efforts can have.
Now, even with this good news, and it is good news, the data also shows a persistent gap. Boys consistently having higher enrollment.
Yeah.
Why do you think that is? What are some of the factors at play there?
Well, unfortunately, there's no single answer.
Okay.
Deep-rooted social and cultural norms in certain regions
Mm-hmm.
still prioritize boys' education over girls.
That makes sense.
And then on top of that, you have practical barriers, things like school fees, lack of sanitation facilities,
Right.
or even just the distance to the nearest school, which can disproportionately impact girls.
Right. And it looks like those challenges are kind of playing out differently depending on where you look geographically.
Exactly. The data really paints a fascinating picture here with stark regional differences.
Mm-hmm.
For example, you mentioned South America.
Yeah.
We're seeing remarkable strides towards gender parity there, possibly due to their investment in girls' education programs.
Okay.
On the other hand, we see places like South Asia where cultural factors might be hindering progress a little bit,
Yeah.
which highlights the need for context-specific solutions.
So it's not a one-size-fits-all. We really need to be tailoring these strategies.
It's about understanding the nuances of each region and collaborating with local communities to create lasting change.
All right, let's kind of zoom in on this breakdown.
Sure.
By level of education. Primary, lower secondary, upper secondary. One thing that stands out is that the lower secondary level shows a closer gap from the start.
Right.
Does this imply that interventions focused on keeping girls in school at a younger age are paying off?
That's a very astute observation, and I think it does suggest that if we can ensure girls are receiving an education early on, it increases their chances of staying in school longer.
Right.
So this could be due to increased awareness campaigns, targeting early education. It could be community-based efforts to support girls' education at the grassroots level.
That's encouraging.
It is.
It shows that these focused efforts can really make a tangible difference.
Exactly.
But then what about, we also see this steeper rise in female enrollment at the upper secondary level.
Right.
What could explain that?
Well, this is where it gets really interesting, I think.
Okay.
Because it could point toward evolving cultural norms, a growing recognition of the value of higher education for girls.
Okay.
As we see more women enter, though, traditionally male-dominated fields, it creates a powerful example for younger generations.
It's like a positive feedback loop almost.
Exactly.
The more we can break down these barriers, the more opportunities become available.
Absolutely.
And it just kind of, it builds on itself, which is really, really encouraging.
Yeah.
This has been incredibly eye-opening. This data is fascinating.
Yeah. I'm also thinking about what this data doesn't show us,
Mm-hmm.
which is, what about those girls who aren't represented in these enrollment numbers?
That's a powerful question. What might their stories tell us?
It really underscores the need for continued research
Mm-hmm.
and a deeper understanding of all the complex factors at play that prevent girls from accessing education.
You've given us a lot to think about.
Thank you.
I really appreciate it. This has been a fascinating deep dive.
My pleasure.
Thank you so much.
Absolutely.
And thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
On this deep dive, we'll see you next time.
It's good.